registration from those states that do participate, compare and see whether or not there's duplication. Somebody's registered in 2 states. If somebody's registered in more than 1 state, obviously there's a problem. So this sets up a uniform, consistent application of the process to make sure it's done consistently and make sure it's done fairly. It provides that the boards, control board shall compare these names and decide, resolve the matter within 30 days. It also provides that nobody's registration is issued canceled within 90 days prior to the primary or general election. So you don't get to a situation at the last minute whether or not the person can vote on it. In the event it turns out that the facts show a person is, the voter has actually moved out of Virginia, then the voter's registration record is processed according to an established procedure, which is the process the same as personal notice, and then following up and finding out did the person really move out of state, or is the person Virginian, moved to Ohio, and then came back to Virginia, and to clear up the issue. And then, Larry Hickey is here, better than I can, he's the registrar for the county adjustment.
I have a question.
All right, I see this also has a fiscal impact. You submit a budget amendment for this. Then was it incorporated in the adopted Senate budget?
Questions for me? Is there anyone to speak in favor of the bill?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, Larry Hickey, General Registrar of Chesterfield County. Senator Edwards says that this bill, which is a reworked version of which you had seen earlier and passed by for the year, this is one that everybody who had an interest have agreed upon. It is important that there be uniformity and consistency in application because the data we're getting from the other states is so bad. Of the active voters in Chesterfield, 17 out of 100 should not have been on that list. And my research based on that data showed that the states of Arizona, Ohio, South Carolina, and Tennessee are not properly maintaining their list, which means they're telling us they have voters that they don't have that are in fact properly registered in Virginia. So those voters are at risk unless we have uniform guidelines. And remember, these are your voters, people who vote for you. So I think it's important that we establish this uniform guideline. There's nothing radical in the bill. There's nothing really creative in the bill. We're using established procedures and processes that we've been using for years, as Senator Edwards said. So, frankly, I don't know why we wouldn't do this, but I certainly ask you to support this and establish these procedures for us. Thank you.
Yes.
If I could, I had an earlier version of this bill. I want to thank Mr. Hickey and the other stakeholders for working on this bill with Senator Edwards to effect what it was I was initially trying to do. And what it does is to regularize and to establish processes, and as Mr. Hickey pointed out, that are desperately needed given the data that's coming in. And so I hope that we can work on this bill favorably.
Yes, Madam Chairman, committee members, Carol Novel with the League of Women Voters of Virginia, and we support this. It was very clear that it needed to have some parameters set, so there was a lack of confusion, and so we believe this will definitely be a step to help that process.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Tram Wynn with Virginia Majority. We worked with Senator Edwards and a number of the registrars and even spoke to State Board of Elections staff to get the language to where it is. As mentioned, it's very different from the version we previously saw. We think this version holds all parties accountable. The State Board of Elections has to think about when they're going to actually send the list to the registrars to make sure it fits within the time frame with the 90-day blackout period. It holds the registrars accountable because they have to process it within 30 days. It holds the voters accountable because we have to respond to the letters that the registrars send out. So we think it's a really good accountability measure that is in place. And it also coincides with the National Voting Rights Act, so it conforms what we're doing at the state level with national laws. We firmly support this bill.
Madam Chair, Nick Greenberg from Virginia Organizing. We do support the bill because we think it properly protects the individual who should be able to vote in Virginia from being inappropriately removed from the rolls, while at the same time provides procedures that will allow people to be removed who should be. So we urge you to support the bill.
Anyone to speak in opposition of the bill?
Madam Chair, my name is Jake Washburn. I'm the voter registrar of Patron County. This is, like my colleague Larry Hackey, I'm on the legislative committee of the Registrar Association. This has been something that has gotten a lot of divergence of opinion in the registrar community. The Registrar Association has not been able to adopt a position pro and con on this. I don't like to take issue with any of my colleagues, particularly not Larry. He's been around for a lot longer than I have. He's very knowledgeable. And many of my colleagues agree with Larry. Many of them think that the program as it is a pretty good program. The thing that this bill would do, I think, primarily would preclude us from canceling a voter who was shown to be registered in 2 different states, in Virginia and in another state, even if we had pretty good data that indicated that the voter's most recent state of residency was in the other state. And instead of being able to do that, we would, if we found that to be the case, put the voter on inactive status, where the voter would remain for the through the next 2 federal elections, so 3 or 4 years, depending on the notice fell. If the data is reliable, and it seems to me that it is, it seems to me if we can cancel voters who we know are residing in other states and no longer residing in Virginia, we reduce the potential for double voting. I don't think that it happens on a widespread basis, but when you have somebody registered in 2 different states at the same time, it is certainly a possibility. If we can reduce that possibility without significantly risking disenfranchising voters, I think that we ought to do it. I think the data that we get gives us a pretty good basis for determining whether a voter is residing in Virginia or in the other state. And so we would cancel with a pretty high degree of accuracy and confidence. And even if we cancel the voter incorrectly, we send them notice, so there's that safety net that they receive notice and get in touch with us, tell us they made an error. And there's an additional safety net, even if they didn't get that notice, if they come to vote on election day, they would be allowed to vote a provisional ballot, and on investigation, we could determine whether that registration was canceled incorrectly. So, with all due respect to Larry and those others who've spoken in favor, I think the program is pretty good as is, and rather than leave voters on the rolls for another 3 or 4 years, those would be reasonably certain or have moved elsewhere, I think could be properly canceled.
Anyone else? State Board?
Madam Chair. Tom Palmer, Secretary of State Board of Elections. To address the point of uniformity, in my mind, from the State Board of Elections, this is a program that was implemented fairly uniformly across the Commonwealth, with the exception of a few registrars. The federal judge upheld what we were doing at the State Board of Elections and the law. And I remind the law was only taking effect since July of last year. So there's really only been 6 or 7 months of the program. The second thing I'd like to point out is that we talk about, the registrar talked about the fact that we have both active and inactive voters that show up as registered in another state. This bill would essentially be like Groundhog Day, because we already have noticed that the voter is no longer residing in Virginia. They're probably placed on the inactive list. For example, there's 100,000, half of them are going to be already inactive voters. So we receive notification from the state that they're registered in their state. This bill, all it allows us to do is place it back in the inactive rolls, and they got to stay on the rolls instead of waiting for another 2 general elections. So it's just Groundhog Day, going through all the work, the same result. The second point is, that I'd like to make, is that Larry points out and others that there's 30 days to do this. Well, that's already the code. Actually, what this law would do is allow an additional 30 days for the registrar. And frankly, I feel that this is an important function amongst the many functions that registrars have, that they should have some sort of limit on what's required. And so the last thing I would simply say is that the law has only been in effect since July 1st. I think it's a successful program. We're still going through the activities that will occur in the federal election year this year. So I think that the board continues to tweak the process, and the Department of Elections will continue to tweak the process. And so I think that it's premature to make a judgment on the program.
Yeah, that was
Mr. Palmer, so you're opposed to this bill?
I think it's Groundhog Day. It's making us do all this work, and it just goes back to the inactive power. It's almost a waste of our time. It really is.
Second question. Is this the position of the administration?
No, it's my position,
Your individual position?
my individual position as Secretary of State Board of Elections.
Mr. Palmer, I have a question for you. If you felt like you needed to make changes on this program, can you do that now in-house? If you needed to make any changes?
Well, the board is addressing what regulatory things we can do. And frankly, the law does provide us flexibility on how we address these issues. Right now, the law says that if we get notice from another state, we get address from another state, we go through cancellation. Well, there are other measures we can do. For example, my suggestion was that we do set parameters in a non-federal election. The NVR guidelines for federal elections, but we're talking, this would standardize that. But and so we're bound by those in federal elections. In a non-federal election, we do think it is prudent to have some sort of timeline prior to an election that we conduct this activity. That 90 days is pretty broad on the federal level. It's not actually necessary. But
You're doing it in...
well, this is a federal year, so we're dealing with the 90-day timeline.
Mr. Cole?
Yeah,
Dr. Cole?
I appreciate the Secretary of the State Board's comments. The voter rolls is definitely something that needed to be cleaned up, because my own experience, my oldest son has been a registered voter in Maryland since 2005. Just about every 2 years, we get a voter card for him at our house. So the voter rolls definitely need to be cleaned up. No, he hasn't been voting.
He's the second Republican in Maryland.
That's
why he moved.
And I appreciate the concerns, but like the Secretary said, I think we need to, the new program is working to clean up the rolls. We did not get a voter card for him this last year, for this last year's elections, so I assume that means he's finally been taken off the rolls after, about 7 years. So I would move that, I think this is premature right now, since we just implemented a program to clean up the rolls, so I would move that we carry this over into the 2015 session.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion that has been seconded to carry this over. Delegate Rush?
I want to comment that this is a similar bill to our friend Delegate Brinks and House Bill 665. This has been refined, but we treated his bill the same way, carried it over to 2015. So.
Sorry to take you down with me.
No, we like you.
All those in favor, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No. Didn't like it when
Thank
you
you.
did.
Thank you so